Hi, I'm Brian Silva,
Hi, my name is Adrian Hernandez.
and today we're going to be presenting our virtual reality experience centered around one of the 17 SDGs, as Kwaku mentioned earlier. And our specific SDG was climate action. However, our that wasn't the main problem we wanted to focus on. We wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the climate action and what caused it, so we focused mainly around fossil fuels specifically. And the reason we focused around this specific SDG was because we both believed the climate crisis and climate action is something that affects all of us everywhere around the world. And even though we might not realize it, it has an impact on every single living thing on the planet Earth. And we feel like this is something that we need to fix now and that we can start fixing now. And so we wanted to get involved in this process of solving the climate crisis. Now, as I mentioned before, fossil fuels was our main problem. However, we needed to figure out a specific problem and start narrowing it down into what exactly we wanted to solve and how our solutions will look like. So we began by asking questions like what causes greenhouse gases, and we realized it was fossil fuels. Why are people still using fossil fuels? Why haven't we switched to renewable energy yet? And from all these questioning and all the answers we received from these, we realized that our main problem we wanted to solve was how can we get people to start using less fossil fuels? How can we get the consumers to stop using fossil fuels?
When talking about this project under SDG, it is important to mention that the design process had a lot to do with it. After finding out the problem, we needed to think of a possible solution. We came up with many solutions from having people buy electric cars to creating laws that force people and companies to recycle waste products. And from a variety of solutions, one that stood out to us the most was simply just taking public transportation. The reason for that is because it can be done easily and in an affordable way.
So going off of this idea of public transportation, we decided to make a game where the user has to choose between private and public transportation options and where they have the freedom to kind of choose their own path. And now we made it so that based off of the options that they choose, based on public or private transportation, they will see a different result at the end and see a different outcome. And this is to teach the user that their actions have consequences on the world around them. Now, we're going to show you a video of our game in action. And it's important to note that whenever there's a choice, whenever a choice is presented to the user, the screen will split into two different screens, each showing the different choices the users can make.
So your tasks are simply ordered by steps, so that way when adventuring around this town, it's not confusing and you're able to know what you're supposed to do and know where you're supposed to go as well. In the beginning, you start off by being welcomed and outside of your home. Your task is then to go to work. You are given two options that you can go to work in. You can either go to work in your car, or you can go to work by taking the public train. In this case, a public train would be a better alternative because although it emits fossil fuels, it can carry more people than those people just taking their cars, which altogether would emit more fossil fuels, and that would be worse for the environment. Once arriving to the pizza parlor, you see some information that is given for both transportations. You are then given directions to your job at the pizza parlor, and you are told to head inside to make a delivery. And then when looking outside and then walking inside, you see a lot of details. And that's because me and Brian wanted the setting to look like it has come to life. And this is simply just by us adding chairs, plants, and lights inside. And then once you arrive to a garage, you are told to make one of two options. Those options being riding a bike or driving a car to make your delivery. The bike in this case would be a better alternative because it emits no fossil fuels compared to the car emitting some fossil fuels. Once you are off the bike and car, you can see more information about those two and how they are both private transportations, but one is a better alternative. You then arrive to the house that you are supposed to make the delivery to, and you do so just by ringing the doorbell. Once you ring the doorbell, the person comes out and simply says thank you.
The next step is to head back home. Now, the user is either presented with a gas-powered bus or an electric cable car. Now, although both of these options are public transportation, so the electric cable car is the better option because it produces no fossil fuels since it doesn't run on gasoline. At this point, you might also be wondering how exactly we're having the user be moved in these vehicles. And the way we have it is we just have a box with collision behind the player that just moving forward at a constant rate as the same rate as the car and is propelling the user forward which gives this illusion that they're riding in a vehicle. Now, you might also be wondering why there's so many walls around the place. Now, since this is a 360 and 3D environment that the user is working in, they have the freedom to move wherever they want. However, we have these walls in place to restrict their movement and so that they can only choose their set paths, but we give them enough freedom so that they can choose which transportation option they want to select. Again, as with the other options, we provide a little bit of more information for the user at the end of the ride. And then afterwards, they're told to head inside and turn the TV on. Now, depending on the choices they made on their journey, the TV screen will show something different. Now, if you chose more public transportation over private transportation options, you will be presented with a thriving city using clean energy like solar panels and wind power. However, if you choose more gas-powered and private transportation options, you'll be presented with a screen that shows a ruined city with forest fires and more pollution. Now, after the news is done playing, the wall behind the TV will disappear, revealing a town, which, just like the TV, depending on what options you chose during your journey, it can either show a ruined town with pollution or a clean town with a thriving town with a clean energy. Now, we've reached the very end of the playthrough, and the user is presented with every single option they chose along the way for each of the 3 options. And they're given a little explanation as to why their options led to the outcome they see on the screen.
When reflecting back on the work and research I did these past couple of weeks, I noticed that I used to think that climate change was simply just a change in temperature. But now when I think about it, it is more than that. Climate change, or should now be known as climate crisis, due to the severity it has been getting, is causing icebergs to melt, meaning that diseases that have been trapped in there for who knows the amount of years are now being released into our atmosphere. This would mean that we would have no idea of the kind of destruction it can cause. Not only that, but another thing would also be the ocean acidification and how a lot of carbon dioxide being emitted in the air is getting absorbed by the ocean, meaning that for some marine life, their growth rates are decreasing. So when I researched and really thought about it, all of our problems are all connected to each other in some way or shape. I used to think that climate crisis was never able to affect me in any way or form, but when I really think about it, the amount of waste that I throw out might not be as much at first, but later on, they tend to add up, causing even more of a bigger problem, making the solution harder to achieve.
Now, the biggest thing that this project has taught me is actually following through the design process can take you a really long way. Now, at first, I wasn't really too familiar with the design process going into this project. Although I did know of the design process and why it's so important, I never understood how exactly to take each step one at a time and actually go through the process. So I always thought the design process was just about brainstorming these solutions that can solve a problem. And I would always just jump straight into trying to get the solutions as soon as possible so that I can keep improving and get the best one. But this project has definitely taught me that the most important step in the design process is actually defining the problem, even before getting to any of the solutions. Now, during this project, we were tasked to dig deeper into our problem. So, for example, we took climate action. We had to ask, what causes climate action? Why is this happening? What causes these greenhouse gases? Why are people still using fossil fuels? And just asking these questions and receiving the answer from an expert and doing our own research as well, we were able to come up with a very narrowed down question that we can actually go ahead and solve. So when coming up with the problem, I realized that not only does the problem have to matter, because if the problem doesn't matter in the first place, your solutions won't matter in the end. And you're basically just going through this design process for nothing. But also the problem you need to define has to be narrowed down. Because take, for example, climate action, you can't just go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to solve climate action, because there's a lot of different parts to it. There's fossil fuels, there's waste materials being produced. There's the ocean and land life to think about. So there's a lot of different problems when we're talking about the climate crisis as a whole. And so we needed to dig deeper and actually think of one specific aspect of the climate crisis that we wanted to solve, which in our case was getting people to use public transportation over private transportation. And doing this process of digging deeper, I really understood what the design process was and how it's so important, because we're able to not only come up with great solutions that will actually have impact on the world, we're solving the problem that we want to solve that also has an impact on the world and can affect everyone in this environment.